please like and subscribe.
Let's focus on the Force Awakens supplementary material. Everyone knows Star Wars' biggest revenue stream doesn't flow from ticket sales. It flows from toys, video games, clothing, novels, comics, etc. The Force Awakens merchandise performed well for retailers. However, the more perceptive began to notice red flags in the ancillary stories. The Force Awakens was filled with unanswered questions, so Kennedy Film marketed its novels and comics with the pretense of backstory. The studio launched a progression called Journey to the Force Awakens. For me, these books were the end of the beginning. You are a collector. What did you think of the merchandise?
So initially, I very much got into collecting the toys. I went to Force Friday that year for the first time. Went to Toys R Us at midnight, got in line, bought the figures, did all that stuff. The 3 3/4 line and the Black Series line from the first film. And I still have a full complete run of all the 3 3/4 Force Awakens figures that came out. I have since sold off all the Black Series. Full disclosure, I took all those 3 3/4 figures and I recarded them on 6x9 card backs so they look like vintage figures, but whatever. 53 figures or whatever that they made. And that includes, pilots that came with vehicles, the Amazon box sets, like all that stuff. I was very much on board with that. I was all into it. I did not buy the novels. I have a complicated relationship with Star Wars books, but just tie-in books, series tie-in books in general. I got to the point when the Courtship of Princess Leia came out, and I read that book, and I was like, this is abject garbage. And I stopped buying books at that point for Star Wars, and I missed out on a couple of things. Timothy Zahn came back with a few more Thrawn books that I missed initially. I didn't read those until many years later. I didn't buy any of the mass market little paperback stories that came out. I didn't buy at that point any of the comic books. So when Dark Horse was doing the comic, I wasn't buying any comic books. I had no interest in any of that, kind of because I got burned on the novel. Or the novels. But then when Disney bought Star Wars, Disney already owned Marvel Comics, so they had announced that Marvel was going to get the license back and like all this stuff. And so I got enthusiastic about the comic books. I am a comic book collector. I collected many titles over the years. So the comic book collecting was more in my wheelhouse over the novels. And so I started getting the Star Wars comics as they initially came out. So they were doing original trilogy characters in comics. And they started introducing some new characters like Dr. Aphra. And that was in like the Vader comic initially. But then they also started putting in these multi-issue short run, limited series of Captain Phasma and some Kylo Ren stuff and the one shot about 3PO's red arm. They did the Poe Dameron series, which I got the entire run of that. But late in the Poe Dameron run, it started to become clear to me that we weren't really getting answers to the questions in the films. And the films weren't doing necessarily a good job of addressing what happened in the previous film. And the side material that I was engaged with was not doing a good job. And I had heard enough, having friends and being part of the YouTube Star Wars community. You're a huge consumer of the novels and paperbacks and things like that. I heard enough from people about these books that were being written that what little attempts were made to try and clarify issues in the films were deeply unsatisfying. And then a majority of the things just weren't addressed. We were told that the expanded universe was now considered Legends. None of that counts. We have a fresh slate. And we were specifically told by Disney, everything going forward, no matter what venue or format that it is released in, everything is canon and everything is complementary. So comic books, novels, video games, cartoons, films, and eventually TV shows, it's all complementary. It all works together. It does not contradict. It enhances, right? And so we're like, okay, great. And they started putting things out. And from what I understand about the Aftermath series of novels, they were billed as explaining how we got to the universe that we arrived in at the beginning of The Force Awakens. Turns out that's only partially true, right? It addresses the Battle of Jakku, and that's about it. The Poe Dameron comic talks about guys redeveloping the TIE Fighter into something new, which is the black TIE Fighter that we got in The Force Awakens with the red stripes on it. But didn't really talk about the First Order. It was talking about industrialists who were financing this new TIE Fighter, but it didn't really give you anything more than that. We get into sort of how Snoke seduced Ben Solo to the dark side, but not very well done and kind of laughable. I mean, he's a gardener, but the comic books contradict one another. And so suddenly we're sitting here going, I still have all these questions about characters, events, world building, the political landscape of the universe in this current Disney Star Wars era, and I'm not getting any answers. I'm getting things advertised to me like they are going to provide answers, so I go buy them and I look at them and I read them and whatever, and they don't help, or they don't fully answer. They create more questions, and so my relationship with the merchandise, the surrounding material, started off very strong with The Force Awakens, and through Rogue One, right? So I bought all the figures and the toys and everything for Rogue One. Still have all those. Love that stuff. But then when we got into The Last Jedi, and I went to Force Friday for that one too. I went to Force Friday for Rogue One, right? Bought the figures. I bought a lot of figures, started getting into that, and I went and saw the movie, and I just stopped. I canceled all my comic book, subscription, or my subscription to the various Star Wars comic book titles, and that was starting to happen kind of going into that, in that post-Rogue One era. I was really not liking the stories and the characters and the new things that they were doing. I was still kind of enjoying the Vader series and then some of the stuff around the original characters. But when they did like the Screaming Citadel thing, that's kind of when I started to check out. And again, this is being billed and sold as this is canon. So now Han Solo has an ex-wife that we've never heard about in any other, iteration of Star Wars. None of the people who were out to get Solo or people who belittled Solo, like the various gangs at the beginning of Force Awakens. Nobody said anything about your ex-wife is looking for you, whatever, right? Like, it's just something that randomly comes up in a comic book, and we're supposed to just say, oh, of course he has an ex-wife, right? So anyway, so like I started to get really kind of not really excited about that stuff, and I was starting to check out of that. But then when we saw, Last Jedi, I was just like, yeah, I'm just done with all this stuff. I just stopped really caring about the new characters and went back to looking at, the original trilogy and prequel characters and, some of the video game stuff. But again, I was moving away from the new content, the surrounding paraphernalia of the saga trilogy stuff. Really, I just really stopped engaging with it as soon as I saw The Last Jedi.
I'll set down my interviewer's microphone and enter my fan's pulpit for a minute or two. I recognized beyond any doubt that we, the fans, were in trouble through the supplementary material. Until The Last Jedi, I read everything published for Star Wars. Aftermath, the first book in Chuck Wendig's trilogy, was highly problematic. Its tone and themes were incompatible with George Lucas's Star Wars, and it had nothing whatsoever to say about The Force Awakens. After months of reading, I learned the entirety of Journey to The Force Awakens had no bearing on the film, or vice versa. In hindsight, the reason was clear. Kennedy Film didn't have a story for the sequel trilogy. They were winging the films one by one, So, of course, the supplementary material for The Force Awakens exposed the absent narrative. No one fleshed out the characters and plot in advance. The novels and comics were dancing around the First Order, Starkiller Base, Supreme Leader Snoke, Kylo Ren, the Resistance, Luke Skywalker, the map, Rey's childhood, and all the other unanswered questions. As you said, we were told everything is canon, one unified canon. But the new novels and comics weren't adding anything to canon. Many people rationalized the lack of meaningful storytelling with speculation about a Disney directive to avoid spoilers. In the end, Journey to The Force Awakens was a waste of money and time. By the second novel in Wendig's trilogy, I'd checked out. You, Sean, as my witness, I purged all my sequel trilogy merch, that is my TFA merch, in the wake of The Last Jedi. But my purchases ended before Rogue One. I hadn't given up on the saga, not completely, not yet, but I awakened to the fraud being perpetrated by Kennedy Film. It was always the next novel or the next comic that would provide a missing piece of the puzzle. Phasma, Hosnian Prime. Just keep reading, folks. You've almost reached a big reveal. Bullshit. And the authors were terrible. We sank from Timothy Zahn, Matthew Stover, and Steve Perry to Chuck Wendig, Greg Rucka, and Claudia Gray. You may justifiably criticize the expanded universe's last gasps. They were very weird. In the early EU, 8 out of 10 books were worthwhile. Their tone and themes fit the galaxy far, far away, and they contained relevant details. Bibliophiles were rewarded with information. I would rather read Fate of the Jedi 10 times than read Aftermath once. So, J.J. Abrams' mystery box collapse preceded the rise of Skywalker. His comeuppance began in the pages of meaningless YA novels and comics from second-rate creators prior and subsequent to The Force Awakens. As a guy who enjoys Star Wars books, I was awfully frustrated by the studio's approach. The supplementary reading might have been the worst aspect of Star Wars between 2015 and 2017. When The Last Jedi drew flack from everyone with a functioning brain, several of Kennedy's lackeys, including Rian Johnson, taunted fans with a sign that read, "Your Snoke theory sucks." I have a rebuttal. Fans wouldn't have Snoke theories if you, millionaires in charge of the most successful entertainment IP in history, developed the sequel's plots and characters before you recorded 1 second of the first film. Period.